I'm Pastor Cal. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's Connect Group lesson. I'm here with Mike Cook and Jim Limbach, also a pastor with DC Church. And we are in session 7 on page 64 of this book right here, ETB, Explore the Bible. And our lesson this week is called Living Wisely. Now, in one sense, I wouldn't call this a very groundbreaking lesson out of God's Word in terms of a lot of it's going to seem like, well, yeah, obviously. But the problem is we just don't do it. So we're not just discussing how to live wisely, but why do we not live wisely, you know? And I think that an idea really is as good as the implementation of it. And so if it is a good idea and it's pretty obvious to it, then we're going to figure out how to do it, live wisely. So our main idea for living wisely today is following the wisdom of God leads to joy, while not doing so leads to grief. Whoa, hold up now. So if you follow God's wisdom, it will lead to joy, a inner peace and contentment that exists regardless of happiness or whatever good or bad is happening in one's life. While not following God's wisdom leads to grief, a very deep inner sorrow. This is groundbreaking stuff. But it may seem obvious to you, but we all struggle with it, so we're going to go through it and we're going to learn a lot today. That's always the goal. So starting off, Mike, can you tell us about a time when you were cooking and you did not follow the recipe and it ended in a kitchen disaster? A kitchen disaster.
Pretty much any time I'm cooking, whether I have a recipe or not, it's probably going to be a kitchen disaster. But so I don't really do a ton of cooking.
Okay.
But I can give you an example from my childhood where, there's a couple times with my parents. My dad was one who liked to experiment a little bit in the kitchen and maybe not even have a recipe, just go wing it from scratch. And he tried his hand at a meal one time, which was basically like a casserole, which in theory had all the makings of a great meal. It had cheese and it had ham, and so you got ham and cheese already. We already love that already. And some of the stuff he put in it, you would think, man, this is going to be just the best thing ever. And it was so inedible that I've spent probably about 3 decades trying to block it out of my memory. That's how bad it was. It was not even something we could eat.
Okay. Well, that sounds traumatic.
It was more traumatic than it even sounds.
30 years ago, it's still bothering him. That's pretty
Yeah.
So, wisdom like a recipe is not just directions on what to do, but for it to be a recipe that's actually implemented, you have to do it. You have to do it a certain way. You have to use the right amounts. You have to weigh things out. You have to do things in the right order to get the right result. And so it may look good with a cursory glance, with a little bit of cheese here, put my ham in, but maybe if you sauteed your ham, kind of caramelized, a little Maillard reaction per se, a little crust, then added the cheese, it wouldn't be so slimy, for example. Slimy is one of those words when it comes to food, you don't normally want to hear that. Unless you're eating pudding, bread pudding, rice pudding. I love puddings a lot, so, I kind of like slimy. But most folks don't like slimy in food. And that is the end of that rabbit trail, okay?
This is Proverbs 14, verses 8 and 15. It says, "The sensible person's wisdom is to consider his way, but the stupidity of a fool deceives them. The inexperienced one believes anything, but the sensible one watches his steps."
First off, you may have noticed this passage is kind of small, right? It's not very long. And the reason why is today we're studying what is called a chiasmus, okay? Chiasmus, chiasmus. It's a literary device used within ancient writings and by people today who are just better writers than I am to make points, okay, by using repetition to emphasize what they want you to know. So what's going to be happening today is Jim just read in the passage the very first passage and the last one. And so the next time when we read again, it's the next passage and then the next to last, and then on and on and on. And that's to make the point, kind of like you start the way you finish, right? To emphasize these things are really important. And so in our culture, we don't talk, we don't write this way, but in a world where there's no video games, there's no email, there's no electronics, no TikTok, I shudder to think there's no TikTok. People had to use the tools they had to make points, to emphasize, to add like nuance to what they're doing. And so chiasmus was one way that ancient writers would do that. You know, I know some people, right, who will play a video game online, and they're talking to their friends on their headset, and their friends in Australia and Colorado and whatever. They got their iPad out, and they're chatting with someone on there, and they're scrolling Instagram or whatever. And then they got their phone out, and they're recording TikTok videos of them on their iPad on Instagram and playing a game and talking to their friends in Colorado and New Zealand. And so we just communicate differently today, but the ancients used chiasmus for a reason, and this is the reason why. So you have two people here, right? You have a fool and you have a sensible person, okay? And so if you are a sensible person, you take wisdom into your life, and in the way you go, you consider it and you keep it close to you like a friend, right? But if you're a fool, you don't take in wisdom, right? You take in something else called stupidity. And the stupidity deceives you, right? So you're walking the path of life with wisdom and you're walking the right way. But if you're a fool, you're walking along with stupidity and it deceives you into all kinds of mess and stuff, right? And the inexperienced person, they believe anything. They're gullible. They are not sensible. But if you are sensible, you watch your steps. So wisdom is like an interpretive lens as you're walking the path. And so let's say you're a freshman in college and you're walking down the path. If you go to college these days, you know, you go on campus and you see American Expresses out there and they're handing out free t-shirts. You go, oh man, free t-shirt is cool. I'm going to go and get a free t-shirt. But you got to sign up for a credit card, right? So you see, inexperience, stupidity, immaturity cause you to walk off the good path to the bad path and get a credit card and a free t-shirt. And you got this credit card, so why not use it, right? So then you get into all kinds of mess. And then you learn about compound interest the hard way, right?
And that free t-shirt costs you $8,000.
That
Yeah.
free t-shirt
Right.
costs you $8,000 over 10 years. But bump. That wasn't a good joke.
Oh, it's
Anyway.
true. Could be true if you're not.
It could be true, right? So, and if you're inexperienced, you're gullible, you believe anything. But if you are sensible, you watch your steps and where you're going. And wisdom is your companion on life's way. So, if that's the case, Mike, I have a question for you. When you think about a sensible Christian, who comes to mind?
So, I mean, that's a lot of names come to mind. A couple of guys at this table come to mind, right?
A couple of guys. There's only three of us, Mike, so I'm in the club. Nice.
Well, you know, I'm trying to be humble. Yeah, but I mean, definitely both of you guys are sensible Christians in my book. Probably the one that came to mind almost immediately was Walter Black, for those of you who remember Walter. And I know part of the question here is why? Why does that person come to mind? What makes them? You know, a sensible Christian is someone who is deliberate in the way they structure their life. And I see that in a lot of the folks that I interact with in church. They read the Word with the idea that there's practical application there. It's not just some story that happened or may not have happened in their mind. It's real, and it has practical application and meaning, and they put it to use. And so, to me, that makes them a sensible Christian.
All right, so the application of wisdom makes you a sensible Christian, right? And it's not just what you don't do, like the bad steps you take, it's what you do to implement wisdom in all areas of your life. And so, you know, what a great example, Mike. So, Jim, do you have anybody that you believe is a sensible Christian? I forgot to ask you. I'm sorry.
No, it's
Jim.
okay. One person that comes to mind, at present company excluded, of course, is, well, you guys are sensible. I didn't mean, Mike's already mentioned you.
Man, this is
I
what
didn't-
a
that
love
didn't
fest.
come out the
huh?
way it meant
What
to
a
come
love
out.
fest. We just love each other
You
so
guys
much.
very sensible. But I had there was a guy who his name is Ron Clark, and if some of you that have been around for a while may remember Ron. But he was when I was a new Christian, he kind of just showed me what it means to live his life as a Christ follower. And he was a good dad. He worked hard. He handled his money responsibly. He took care of his home. Not that those things make you a Christian, but they're just the way he lived his life showed me that he had sense in so many different areas. And I've known people who weren't Christians, who also were successful, took care of their family. But there was just this quality about him that showed that it kind of exuded Christ. So he lived his life. He worked hard. He did all these things, but at the same time, he was intentional. I think Mike used that word. Right? He was intentional about how he lived his life. So he could be out washing his car, and a neighbor could walk by, and he would turn that into a conversation about Jesus, about his faith. So that to me is a sensible Christian, always looking for an opportunity. And he did it with me on numerous occasions, which is, I think, in large part is why I'm where I am today in my relationship with Jesus. But it made me want to be more like Jesus when I was around him. And to me, that was a sensible Christian, if that makes sense.
So to go back to the journey of life, right? So if wisdom puts you on the path to a good life and a godly life where you know God, the chief way you know God is through the way that God used for us to know him, which is Jesus Christ. So Jesus is kind of like a gate that wisdom you would journey through and to get to God. So why wouldn't that come out in your everyday life and behaviors and how you talk to people?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not just what you don't do, it's what you do. And in this case, what you do is you live in an active way, what is right, what points to Jesus, and also you talk about Jesus in like a normal way as if he is your master, your Lord,
Right.
your
And
Savior.
I think, real quick, just one final point on that, Cal. I think one of the marks of that, of a sensible Christian, isn't somebody that kind of is a Christian on Sundays or a Christian who's at Christian events, right? But that someone's a Christian all the time, regardless of whatever they're doing. Because that's how we're called to live, to be Christ's ambassadors. And to do that, we can't check that at the door when we go into a situation where we don't think we should be representing Christ. It happens wherever you are, whatever you're doing. If you're pumping gas, if you're cutting your grass, whatever you're doing, Christ is at the center of it. That's a sensible Christian to me.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was
Thanks for
thinking, I was
asking.
thinking of jokes that were about what you just said that weren't bad, but they weren't really relevant to what's going on here. And maybe you're going to wonder what they were, and they're not really important. What's important is that you never stop being a Christian. You never check your Christianity at the door, if you will.
Yeah.
So we're going to keep studying. Now, Mike, would you read our next
Yeah,
passage for us?
this is Proverbs 14:9 and 14, which tells us, "Fools mock at making reparation, but there is goodwill among the upright. The disloyal one will get what his conduct deserves, and a good one what his deeds deserve."
So once again, a chiasmus. The verses here are meant to parallel. So we have a word here that we've heard, in like the role today and what our country is talking about, reparation, right? Reparation means to repay, to make right. And so when we read this word, we tend to look at it in a political context, and that can cause us to just close our minds off and our hearts from listening, or it can cause us to listen in a little closer. That's a great discussion. That isn't exactly the discussion we're having today, though. Reparation simply here means to repay or make right the wrong that was committed. And amongst the Jews, when this was written in the nation of Israel, reparations were a big deal, meaning if you personally wronged someone in your lifetime and you knew about it, to make amends is not just to go, well, gee willikers, I'm sorry about that. It's to do whatever it takes to make it right. They saw this as a spiritual issue. They looked at it as an issue of being a neighbor, of acting the right way, and it was really important culturally to them, right? So fools mock the individual for trying to make right the wrongs that he's committed. Now, very important here, this just kind of assumes that whether you're a fool or you're a wise man, you're still going to wrong someone at some time in some way. But the wise man, he has goodwill in his life and amongst the upright around him because he tries to make right his mistakes when he wrongs a person. But the fool just goes, not my problem, it's over and done with, and moves on. And so The disloyal, i.e., the one who mocks at making reparation, he's disloyal to the relationship, to like a neighbor or to the nation, and to God who wants us to live in harmony. He will get what his conduct deserves. He'll get punishment. But the good one, the one who tries to make things right and live in a blameless, upright way, he'll get what he deserves for what he did. And so being a person where you live upright, where you, if you commit a wrong, you go to someone, you ask, you repent before God and to them for how you wronged them. And if there's a way to make it right, then you make it right, right? Yeah. You make it right, right? Yeah. So, Jim, how does pursuing the wisdom of God lead to contentment regardless of whatever you're going through?
Well, Kyle, you talked about how we're all gonna at some point wrong somebody, right? I think the difference is when you're living your life, when you're pursuing wisdom, when you do wrong somebody, your conscience can be clear because it wasn't. Let me make sure I'm saying this the right way. It's not like you set out to wrong them, right? If you're living your life pursuing wisdom, yeah, you're going to mess up, but you're going to repent from that, and you're going to make those reparations that we talk about here. And you're going to be able to live with that clear conscience. You're going to be able to lay your head down at night and know that, yeah, I made a mistake, but I confess my sin. I ask for forgiveness from the person I offended and from God. And that's where true contentment comes from, right? And Paul talks about it in Philippians 4, where you can learn to be content and in whatever circumstance we're in. And I love this I highlighted it because I didn't want to get it wrong, but it says, contentment in Jesus means that we can be content in our circumstances without being content with the circumstances, right? So it's not a complacency type of contentment, but it's knowing that we're living our lives in a way that's following this wisdom that God has laid out for us. Not perfectly, because as you said, we're going to make mistakes, but when we do, we own up to them, and it gives us that clear conscience and the contentment that comes from knowing Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, that's wonderful. So, kind of moving on here. Jim, will you read for us our next passage?
Yes, this is Proverbs 14, verses 10 and 13. And it says, "The heart knows its own bitterness, and no outsider shares in its joy. Even in laughter, a heart may be sad, and joy may end in grief."
I love this because it is so dark. It just lays bare what every single one of us knows is true about ourselves. That each and every one of us carries some deep, terrible, dark things. We're bitter, we're messed up inside, and whether you have a spouse, you're married, or a really good friend, they may know you, but there's only two people who really know you, and that is you, and that's God. And ironically, as much as you know yourself and how dark you are and how bitter you are, God knows even more about how dark and how bitter you are. That's a thought that I keep to my, that I think at night, and I go, that just really puts another spin on things. But your heart knows the struggles, the hardships, the bitterness, the wounds that you carry, right? And that even when you're happy, even when you experience joy, you're never really quite able to relate to the person to your left or to your right. You can relate to them, but there's still kind of a wall because we're independent organisms, individuals, if you will. And so, to speak of it in a different way, even in laughter, a heart may be sad, and a joy may end in grief. I think about a sad clown, My makeup is a smile, but that doesn't mean I'm actually happy. I may be telling jokes, and a lot of comedians are really dark, depressing people, and maybe telling jokes, but inside they're really dark and empty. And so even in the most joyous moments in life, a heart may actually be very sad and bitter and dark. And even the joy you have over an event in life may end in grief. This is meant to point us to the temporality of life, the fact that it won't go on forever, the fact that no matter how clear or wide the road of life looks for us, if we're walking it out of, and we're not in relation with wisdom before God, we are ultimately walking a path to our own destruction. And so each and every one of us carries in us like a restlessness, the bitterness, the unhappiness in our soul that tells us in little small ways over and over again, there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with you. And I think that's a good thing because that's the starting point for knowing what you're really made for, and that's to know God. So, you know, in a way, that was a pep talk. So,
Really?
So Mike, Mike, I've got a question for you. What if someone asked you about the joy that's abiding in your heart? How would you describe it?
I would have answered that question a lot differently if I hadn't had that great pep talk. No, I think, some of what you just touched on is a really big piece of that. And when we think about the fact that we all do have this really dark piece that we know about, and probably very few people know about but us, except for God. God has no reason to view us any other way but that person, but yet he does. He sees us through the lens of Christ, and you can't have anything but joy in knowing that that's the way God views you, despite who you are, right? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like the bubble boy type view of life, in that you're going to goof up a lot. No matter how bad of a day you're getting, you're protected from those goof ups because you have this thing called grace. And so it just changes your mood about everything that you deal with as you go through tough days.
So no matter how dark we think we are and how true it actually may be and isolated, that God has richly bestowed love upon us and a calling as his children. And so that's what combats and struggles with the darkness, the emptiness, the bitterness in each and every one of us. And so we may feel like sad clowns, but in actuality, we're something more. We're children of God.
There's the pep talk.
Hey.
Jim, would you keep reading for us
Sure.
and finish our passage today?
Yep, this is Proverbs 14, 11, and 12. It says, "The house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent of the upright will flourish. There is a way that seems right to a person, but its end is the way to death."
So we have this idea of you live in community with others and you make reparation for wrongs that you commit, whether you are mean to someone, you rob someone, cheat someone. An old school thing, you move your boundary stone, so you steal some of their property and go, that stone was always over there. I don't know what you're talking about. But ultimately, those who walk in evil acts, those who spurn a relationship with God, those who live as fools, they and their house, they will have no legacy. It'll all be destroyed. But the tent of the upright, of the wise, of the godly will flourish as they walk the path of wisdom. And this is one of those verses that resonates so well with modern life. It all does, but this does in particular, because there is a way that seems right to a person, but its end is the way to death. Have you ever been influenced by pop culture? Well, you're silent, so that tells me that yes, you have, because you're thinking this over. It also may be because you're not in the room right now, but I choose to think it was the first one. But anyway, it is so dangerous to operate off of our feelings and to operate off of what we like and what others like around us, because that assumes that we have the answers. But we just saw the Word of God cut deep into every one of our hearts and tell us that we're all really sad clowns. We're bitter. We're dark. And something's wrong with us. We choose the bad way. We are drawn to immoral acts. So if this is the cumulative weight of the human experience, why would this way be the right way? It would seem to me, given history, my knowledge of myself, my knowledge of others, I should be extremely skeptical of the ways that seem right to a person or to a culture or to a group. And that's because its end, its consequence is the way to death in the body, but also death in the spirit, living a dead, empty, meaningless life. And so that's a very, very sad thing. And so, Jim, what is a wrong way that someone you know is following? And where will that person end if he or she continues on that path?
Yeah. So I think, Cal, probably the most common way of life I see that's leading people away from on that path that's going to lead to death is this materialism, living a life where you're trying to accumulate as much as you can, as fast as you can, and just putting your worth in other things that don't really matter, right? The car you drive, the house you live in. You can even take kids. How successful are my children? How many events are my kids involved in? And that to me is like the idol of today, right? Materialism and just trying to live this life that looks like it's perfect, or looks like it's fulfilling. And Solomon spoke a lot about that in Ecclesiastes, right? It's all he figured out it's all meaningless. So that to me, and I know plenty of people, and I'm not going to name any names. You're trying to get me in trouble, yeah. So I know plenty of people that are pursuing that lifestyle, and that God is not even a thought in their lives because they're so tied into this this American dream, quote unquote, and it's going to lead to death. Maybe not. Eventually we're all going to die, right? But I'm talking. It's going to lead to eternal death, and they're going to realize at some point that they've been chasing after the wrong thing. And I just thank God, because I was on that path for many years, and I thank God that He gave me the wisdom to realize that ladder was leaning against the wrong building, and I wasn't going to climb it anymore. But there's so many people that's life to them, right? It's how much money can I make? How much stuff can I accumulate? I think the big problem with that is because it doesn't look like this wicked lifestyle, right? It's not like somebody's involved in drugs or they have an alcohol problem or they're living some type of lifestyle that's completely, leaving them on a street corner. But in a way, it's doing worse because it makes them feel like they've got, like they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So, yeah. And yes, I will commit to praying for those people today. I pray. I have many people in my life. That's the next part of the question that Cal didn't answer. But I have many people in my life who I see on that path, and I pray for them regularly.
Well, there you have it, folks. These two guys don't give me much to say in response. So, Mike, could you list for us a few of the causes and cures for the lack of contentment and joy that people may experience?
I think Jim hit on a big chunk of it in his last response. Greed, covetousness, if I can get that out, covetousness. Chasing after those things that are unhealthy, those materialistic things. And on some level, maybe even a little bit of entitlement. We kind of teach ourselves, the culture teaches us, well, you've worked hard, you deserve better things, and man makes his way in the world, and when he makes his way in the world, he deserves to get ahead. And so those are all some of those things that lead to not having contentment and joy because you never achieve all those things that you think you're supposed to get. Yeah. And, so the end result of that is you don't see the things that are in your life that you should be joyful about. You're surrounded by blessings, but you don't see them because you're looking ahead at all the things you think you should be getting.
Yeah. Getting very existential here, Mike. Well, you see, it's who am I? I can't really say who I am because I am not the author of me. At one point, I just realized that I was here. I was taking a ride on planet Earth, And so maybe I don't know who I am, what my identity is, so I think, well, maybe I am what I do. Maybe I am what I like. Maybe I am what I have, what I accomplish, who I spend time with. But none of those things can actually answer the fundamental question of who am I. They just take some of the attention off of that question. The only one who can answer the question of who I am is my Creator. That's the only one who can do that. And so once you have that question answered, you know who you are. Every other question, every other want in life pales in comparison. It gets contextualized and brought under the authority of the one who can answer the question, who am I?
And not to take it back to a dark place, but when you think about some of the wealthy, famous people that we've heard about over the years who've chased after those things and they got them, and they got the money and they got the fame and all the big houses and the fancy cars and the jewelry, and the suicide rate for people in that demographic is actually pretty large because they get there and they realize that it's not fulfilling them. It doesn't give them joy. They thought it would, but it didn't. So
And I just
now-
want to, yeah, I
now
just
we're-
want to say,
now we're dark again.
I just want to say one thing real quick too. We're not promoting like a poverty gospel here.
No.
I mean, I think it's great if you work hard and you can buy nice things, then do it, right? Be generous, take trips, buy stuff, but don't put don't make that who you are.
Right.
Is what I was saying. So
Yeah.
we're not saying you can't have things. If you work hard,
Absolutely.
you're entitled to.
We're not.
No, Cal, we're not.
Well, I got to change some of my notes here because I had a whole lot of homework about asking you guys to sleep outside and to I don't know, just do crazy stuff
Yeah, I mean, if God's blessed
to
you
punish your
financially,
bodies, you
Yeah.
know.
if He's blessed you financially, then enjoy that blessing, but use it in a way that points back to Him, right? Be generous. Invite people over to your big house to swim in your pool or to ride on your boat.
Created things cannot have the place of the creator. That's the fundamental
Yes.
point.
Yeah.
Yes.
A car is just an amalgamation of metals and today many composite plastics into a body that moves in locomotion. Okay, it's not a moral being. We are the moral beings. We aren't the car isn't the problem. We're the problem.
Yeah.
Yep.
Your car can have a problem, but that's a different use of that word problem. Anyway, Jim,
Yes.
what blessings have you experienced as a result of following the wisdom of God?
So I think the best thing that comes to mind here is, Jennifer and I, the house we lived in, we've lived in for 23 years. We bought it when our oldest daughter was about a year old. Our second daughter wasn't even born, and we kind of saw it as like this will be a nice starter house, right? We'll start here, and then as we move up, we'll get a bigger house, nicer neighborhood. And we actually started that process several times, looking for different houses we could afford bigger. But God just gave us, through His wisdom, impressed upon us that this is not, you got what you need, And I thank God for that all the time, because now it's just Jennifer and me again. We're empty nesters. And had we bought a bigger house, we'd have too much house. We'd be looking to downsize, and we'd be in a situation where
You could play some cool Nerf wars, though, Jim.
that's true, yeah. But it was nothing I did, because trust me, I wanted more, right? And I knew at the time we could afford more. But He just gave us this peace and this contentment through His wisdom that, hey, you've got what you need, and just be happy where you are here. And it's led us to be able to live our lives now in a way that's, if we were saddled with a bigger house and bigger finance, bigger expenses that come along with that, we wouldn't be able to do the things that we like to do and live our lives the way we like to live in terms of just simplicity, really. So yeah, contentment, that's just God giving us that. And again, I want to stress that's nothing we did. That came directly from God, because everything in me screams for bigger, nicer, shinier. So I know that's from God.
From the way you described yourself, you could be a raven or a crow,
Yeah,
just looking for trinkets and things to put in your nest.
I could.
But I know that's not what you meant. So anyway, living wisely, it's about walking the path of wisdom. Wisdom's your companion on that path, making things right when you wrong a person around you, and that includes making true amends, not just, speaking the words, I'm sorry, but make it right if you have to make it right. Wrestle with the dark stuff inside of you, because that will point you more and more to God and away from yourself. And recommit to the path every day, because when you go off the path, you go into destruction in the body and in the spirit. So thank you so much for attending Connect Group with us this week. We'll see you for our next one.